Welcome back. I am Tamara Johnson. I am the author of the book Stronger Than I Knew, and this is my book right here. And I am back for another weekly chapter bite reading and discussion with you on unpacking some of the things that I have written about in my book. I also want to let you know that my book is still available for purchase on Amazon as well as in the Kindle store. So you can go on over to Amazon.com, type in the title Stronger Than I Knew, and my book will pop right up. And you can go ahead and purchase your copy today if you haven't done so. So let's jump into today's reading. I am reading from chapter 3 today, and we're going to be talking about boundaries and kind of my decision to create some boundaries, to honor them, and what that looked like for me. So let's jump right into it. As I continue my efforts to understand trauma and recovery, I'm learning that when boundaries have been violated, and in my case, repeatedly, I must make a decision. I can either stay in the dysfunction or leave it. And in my case, I chose to leave it. That was not an easy decision for me to come to. That decision is something that I labored with for years and years and years, because let's just face it, when you are in a family that you love, but is also dysfunctional, it can be a little bit confusing at times as to, are your feelings valid? Are your experiences valid? Are the things that you are grappling with, are they serious enough that you have to walk away, or is it something that you can work through? In my case, I did try to work through on several occasions some of the dysfunction that was occurring in my family unit. But the thing with that is that when you are trying to heal and when you're trying to break cycles within a family, it requires full participation on everyone's part. And that was not always the case for me. So I had to do something that I was not used to doing, that I was certainly not comfortable doing, which was choosing myself. I had that airplane moment, proverbial. When you're flying on an airplane and right before the plane takes off, they kind of tell you the safety precautions that you need to take in the event of an emergency landing. And one of the things that they share with you is that if for some reason, the pressure changes in the cabin, the oxygen mask is going to drop down. And they strongly advise that you put your mask on first before helping anyone else. And the reason for that is because if the oxygen is being depleted within the cabin of the airplane and you stretch over to help someone else, you could pass out. So the whole idea of saving yourself first is something that we've heard many times. If you travel, you've heard that announcement many times. But when you take that same concept and apply it to your familial unit and your familial function or dysfunction, sometimes it can present a little bit of a challenge in the way of you're having to make a decision that is not going to be popular. You're having to make a decision that is absolutely 100% going to be judged. It's going to be talked about. It's going to be picked over. It's going to be ridiculed by those around you, that people who know you, people who don't know you, people who think they know you. And at the end of the day, that was my case. And I had to come to a painful and slow decision. It was not an easy decision to make. It was not an overnight decision. My decision kind of evolved over the years of me trying to bring together and put back together what was broken in my family. The problem is that I needed participation and cooperation from others, and I didn't always have that. And in my case, sometimes, not all the time, but in my case, that cooperation didn't come until towards the end of some of the relationships that I had, in that my loved ones passed away. So they, right before they passed away, we were able to reach a place of understanding and reconciliation. But the process of getting there, I had to make boundaries for myself. I had to declare what my boundaries were. I had to communicate them effectively with my loved ones. And that wasn't always easy. That was not always something that was understood, because in their mind, what's the problem? In their minds, it was, well, we're family, so I have a right. I am your mother. I am your father. Therefore, you don't have the right to tell me no. And that is simply not true. I had to come to the painful awareness that because of the traumas that I experienced in my childhood, that kind of stained and kind of rippled through my adulthood, I realized that I was living a life that I had boundaries, but I wasn't always honoring them. And in some places and areas in my life, I didn't have any boundaries at all, because boundaries was not a concept that was familiar to me. It was not something that was taught, and it certainly was not something that was displayed. As a matter of fact, I would go as far as to say that's not what was modeled in my familial unit. In my family, there were boundaries for other people, but within the familial unit, meaning from one person, one family member to the next, there were very little boundaries. Sure, there were boundaries in regard to me as a child respecting my elders. Absolutely, that was a boundary. But were there boundaries in regard to my personal space, my emotional space, my body? No, there were not many of those boundaries. And so basically, I grew up in an environment and in a household where you are seen and not heard. And so that right there, just that, I don't know what to call it. That concept, we'll just go with that. That concept of a child being seen and not heard is so detrimental, because what it actually does is it takes away that child's voice. It takes away the opportunity for that child to be able to say, I'm hurting, or I don't like this, or something is happening to me. So because I did not have that openness within my familial unit, that in itself was part of the dysfunction, in that I was never allowed to voice the things that truly bothered me, because it was seen as disrespect. It was seen as me, being rude. It was seen as me challenging authority, unfortunately for me. So when situations arise that were harmful to me, I didn't feel like I could push back and say, no, I don't like this, or no, I don't want this, or, such and such is happening to me. I hope that makes sense. So growing up under that kind of spilled over into my adult life, in that when I became an adult, certain things would happen to me in friendships and relationships, and I wouldn't say anything, because now I have been kind of indoctrinated into this boundaryless type of living, in that if something happens to me, sure, I might be offended, but I'm not going to ever say anything about it, because that's seen as wrong or rude or being a troublemaker. I hope this is making sense to you. So it's not until I started seeking therapy that my therapist actually helped me understand that boundaries are actually healthy. Boundaries are useful. But the thing about boundaries is it's not enough to say that you have them. You have to honor them yourself. And honoring them means making hard, painful decisions that are going to be unpopular. And in my case, I made the decision to leave the dysfunction of my family, because my peace meant more to me than staying in a family that was highly dysfunctional. And to the outside world, we might have appeared to be a happy, close-knit family, but no one really knew of the inner turmoil that I experienced because I was pretty good at camouflaging it. I was pretty good at not cluing anyone around me in of my unhappiness, of the struggles and the stress and the strenuousness of being in my family. And so when I finally came to that painful decision of I'm going to have to walk away, I'm going to have to put the mask, oxygen mask on myself, that was probably one of the most terrifying decisions, but also the most life-giving decisions that I've ever made in my entire life. Am I regretful that it didn't turn out a different way? Absolutely, 100%. Am I regretful for making that decision? No, I am not. I will never be regretful for making that decision. Could I have made a different decision? Possibly so. Anything is possible. But that is the decision that I made for myself. That was the most life-giving, most healthy thing that I could do for myself at that time, which was to separate myself from the dysfunction. And you know, when you're talking about boundaries and when you are a cycle breaker, which is what I am, in that you have certain generational curses or cycles within your family, and you take a look and you take stock of your family and you realize that you don't want to repeat some of the same mistakes, that you've seen your family members make. You do feel like an outsider. People are not going to understand. They're not going to want to understand, A, not all the time, and B, they're going to judge you. They're going to have something to say about it. They're going to want to express their opinion, whether you've solicited one or not. It just is something that comes with the territory of making a bold boundary, such as disconnecting yourself or separating yourself from dysfunction within a family unit. People are going to be upset about it 100%. But for me, I felt like my peace of mind and my sanity was worth more to me than staying in a dysfunctional family where my voice did not matter, my opinion didn't matter, my trauma was not validated or seen, understood, heard, or anything of the like. That was death for me. And so, yes, it was a painful decision, but it was one that was necessary for me. It was one that brought a lot of life, and it brought clarity to my life. It allowed me to really step outside of what had happened to me and what was happening to me. And it allowed me to get to choose how I choose to live my life here on out. I can either choose to accept disrespect. I could choose to accept, individuals violating my boundaries, or I could actually assert myself and use my voice and speak up and say, you know what, I might have allowed this before in the past, but I no longer want to participate with that. I no longer allow this into my life. And anytime you do that, the people who are accustomed to you not having boundaries, they are going to push back. They are going to be upset. They're not going to like it because you're disturbing the flow. You are disrupting the order that they are accustomed to. But again, I want to put this out there and say, is it worth your peace of mind? Is it worth your sanity? Is it worth your mental health and your mental capacity to be able to function within the dysfunction? For me, it was not. That is not a call that I can make for anyone but me. And for me, it wasn't worth it. And so I had to leave the dysfunction. Now, in leaving the dysfunction, am I going to say that, everything fell apart. Yes, in some respects, yes, it did. Was some of it able to come back together? Yes, some of it was able to come back together, but it has to come back together in a different way. You can't leave the dysfunction only to return to the dysfunction and expect the changes to stick. So for me, that looked like me being abundantly clear on what my boundaries were and what I would allow in my life and what I would not allow in my life. And then for the family members on the receiving end of that, they also had a decision to make. You're either going to honor my boundaries and respect them, or you're not. And depending on what their decision was, would let me know where the relationship was going to be. Some relationships got off to a rocky start, but somehow, by the grace of God, we were able to establish an understanding and move forward. And some of them, sadly, we did not. And so those people are not a part of my life at this point in time. And that's not to say that they can't be in the future, but it kind of takes two to tango. And so I want to leave you with this challenge. I want to ask you, what are your boundaries? Do you have boundaries? Are you honoring your boundaries? It's not enough to say, oh yeah, I have boundaries, but do you honor them? And that right there is a learning process. That is something that does not come instinctively. That's something that you have to learn by kind of jumping in and doing it. And some days you're going to do it perfectly and some days you're not. I'm still not perfect at communicating and honoring my boundaries. I still struggle from time to time with communicating what my boundaries are and honoring them. But it's something that I'm constantly working at and evolving in. So I hope that today's chapter bites, that you were able to pull something from that. I hope that you were able to take a few notes and apply this to your life and see how your life changes, see how it impacts your life. I want to thank you so much for spending some time with me today. Don't forget to go ahead and order your copy of Stronger Than I Knew on Amazon.com and in the Kindle store. And until the next video, I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.